This is Ravi Visvesvaraya Sharada Prasad on Tuesday, 21st September 2021. The news just came that India has been ranked 46th in the Global Innovation Index 2021 of WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. And in 2015, India was ranked 81st. And the Indian government put out a self congratulatory statement saying the consistent improvement in the GII ranking is owing to the immense knowledge capital, the vibrant startup ecosystem, the amazing work done by the public and private research organizations. And the Indian government statement continued. The scientific departments like the Department of Atomic Energy and the Department of Science and Technology and the Department of Biotechnology and the Department of Space have all played a pivotal role in enriching the national innovation ecosystem. And the Indian government statement went on that Niti Aayog has been working tirelessly to ensure the optimization of the national efforts for bringing policy led innovation in different areas, such as the electric vehicles, biotechnology, nanotechnology, space, and alternative energy sources. And this is what the Indian government's statement had said. And in the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization Innovation Rankings, which are based on 81 parameters, the top countries were: first was Switzerland, second was Sweden, third was USA, fourth was UK, and these top four retained their rankings from 2020. Fifth was South Korea, which was up from 10th last year. Sixth was the Netherlands. Seventh was Finland. Eighth was Singapore. Ninth, Denmark. 10th, Germany. 11th was France. 12th was China, up from 14th last year. 13th was Japan, up from 16th last year. 14th was Hong Kong. 15th was Israel. And I would have thought that Israel would have ranked higher than 15th because we all know how good Israel is at innovation. 16th was Canada. 17th was Iceland. 18th, Austria. 19th was Ireland, and 20th was Norway. And Australia and New Zealand were ranked 25th and 26th. And ahead of India, which was 46th, were Malta was 27th, Cyprus was 28th, the United Arab Emirates was at 33rd, Bulgaria was 35th, Malaysia was 36th, Turkey was 41st, Thailand was 43rd, and Vietnam was 44th. So, all these countries which do not have India's strong educational background in science and technology were still ranked higher than India was at 46th. And I would now like to recount some personal examples of innovative thinking, or rather, the lack of creative thinking in the Indian mindset. So, there is the marigold flower which we use in garlands, and that is such an integral part of Hindu religious and social rituals that it is hard to believe that the marigold is actually a native of Mexico, and Guatemala. The Tagites marigold were brought to India by the Portuguese in the 16th and 17th centuries, and because of their orange saffron color, marigolds began to be grown by Indian farmers. And within a few years, in the 17th century, Indian farmers discovered that fields where marigolds were grown would no longer be infected by nematode worm pests. And this discovery found its way back to Guatemala, and the decoctions of marigold roots began to be used in Aztec medicine to prevent worm infestations of the digestive tracts. And my father's younger brother, Professor H.Y. Mohan Ram, he was an eminent botanist and geneticist, and he was also interested in economic botany. And early in his career, he was delivering a lecture on botany in the Netherlands, and he casually mentioned in passing that when Indian farmers began growing the Tagites marigolds brought by the Portuguese, they observed that those fields were no longer infected by nematodes worms. And 2 years later, my uncle received a letter from a Dutch researcher saying, "Oh, I attended your lecture where you mentioned that marigolds repelled nematodes, and I have successfully identified the chemicals secreted by the roots of these marigolds plants, and I have worked out how they interfere with the reproduction cycle of the nematodes, and I have obtained 3 patents. And thank you so much for giving me this idea." Now, see, for 3 centuries, no Indian scientist had bothered to work out the biochemical mechanisms of how marigolds repelled nematodes or worms. No Indian scientist had bothered to manufacture a pesticide and make a profit. But a European scientist had just picked up on a very chance, casual remark by my uncle to obtain patents and the commercial profits that follow from these patents. And even to my uncle, who had studied at Cornell University in USA, Ivy League, and he had worked in Europe, and even to my uncle, it had not occurred to him to commercialize the knowledge which he had. And the Tigrites marigold roots, they secrete a chemical called alpha terthionyl, which inhibits the hatching of eggs of the root node nematodes Meloidogyne and the eggs of the lesion nematodes Pratylenchus. Now, another very telling example about innovation and the application of knowledge to practical use is India's national flower, the lotus flower, Nilambo nucifera, which is Kamala, Pankaja, Niraja, the lotus flower. And we Indians have known for thousands of years that the lotus leaves and flowers, they rise above the muddy water without getting soiled themselves. And the Sanskrit name Pandu Keya Ruha for the lotus literally means something clean and pure, which is born from mud and dirt, but rises above the mud and dirt in which it was born, rises unsullied above the mud and dirt in which it was born, Pandukeya Ruha. Now, this phenomenon of lotus leaves rising above muddy waters without being soiled themselves is part of Hindu and Jain and Buddhist philosophy and literature and history, and is described in the Bhagavad Gita also. Padma Patrami Vambhasa, Padma Patrami Vambhasa. And yet, for thousands of years, no one in India bothered to investigate the scientific mechanisms of this phenomenon. And just think of the numerous commercial products that could have been developed using these dirt repellent and water repellent technologies available from nature. Clothes that do not get dirty, and so clothes that do not need to be washed, floors and roofs of houses that do not need to be cleaned, buildings that do not need to be painted. And so, trillions of man hours of effort and thousands of crores, lakhs of crores of rupees could have been saved if we had thought of all these dirt repellent technologies. But it actually took until 1977 for German scientists at the University of Bonn to study this phenomenon of why lotus leaves do not become dirty. It was a Wilhelm Bartholot and his colleagues at Bonn University. And these German scientists quickly developed antifungal and anti-algal paints, roof tiles, and self-cleaning cars. And Swiss scientists went on to develop stain-resistant fabrics for upholstery. And recently, some American scientists used the water repelling properties of the lotus leaves to develop coatings for, for electronic gadgets and cellular phones so that they do not get damaged if they are dropped into water. But on the other hand, there are also some examples of creative thinking from my student days at IIT Kanpur, the Indian Institute of Technology at Kanpur, and one instance was a chemistry course which I took in my fifth year, which was taught by Professor P.T. Narasimhan, and PTN was one of the most distinguished scientists ever produced by India. And P.T. Narasimhan, he told me, Ravi, I'm teaching this new course for the first time, and I want you to sign up for it. And this was a course on molecular structure, and which was at the intersection of mathematics, group theory, and linear algebra, and quantum mechanics, and material science, and solid state physics, and structural chemistry. It covered all these aspects, and it was a very interesting course, and I was pretty much topping the course throughout. And there were only about half a dozen hand-picked students in this course, mostly PTN's PhD chemistry students, plus me, an undergraduate who was interested in solid state electronics and materials engineering. And then in the second mid semester examination, the very first question seemed to bear no resemblance at all to anything which Professor P.T. Narasimhan had taught in the course. And I tried, but I could not even understand the problem, let alone solve it. And so I wrote out several approaches in desperation. And after the exam, I went to Professor P.T. Narasimhan and I said, look, I've been topping your course until now, but I could not even understand this question at all. What is the correct answer? And Professor P.T. Narasimhan looked at me and replied, I don't know. And I said, very, very surprised. I asked him, what do you mean you don't know? You set the exam paper and you're saying you don't know the answer to your own question? And P.T. Narasimhan repeated, I don't know the answer, but neither does anybody else in the world. And then P.T. Narasimhan, he explained to me that this was an advanced research topic in chemistry on which he'd been working on for the last several months, but he had got badly stuck. And then he added, Ravi, there is a reason why I wanted you to take this particular course. And he said that this particular question was targeted mainly at me. And Professor P.T. Narasimhan, he explained, Ravi, you're not a chemistry student, so you would have a totally fresh mind. You do not know how difficult this problem is, so you would not be afraid to attempt to solve it. And he went on, my PhD students know how difficult this problem is. So their subconscious mind would not even think of certain approaches which actually might turn out to work. And since they already know a lot about chemistry, they would quickly discard certain other approaches as not being plausible when in fact they might work. And then Professor P.T. Narasimhan went on. He explained to me, since I set this as an exam question, you would assume that there would be a correct solution, and you would try very hard to find it. And maybe one of your ideas would suggest a possible solution which I could use in my research. And another instance was my fourth year practical training at the Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, which I did with the world famous Professor C.N.R. Rao and another excellent faculty member, K.J. Rao. Both of them had just shifted from IIT Kanpur, and I was doing my project with them. They shifted from IIT Kanpur to the Institute of Science at Bangalore, and so I went there to continue my summer training project. And my task was to grind up certain chemical salts and melt them in a high temperature furnace and cool them very, very quickly. And according to the existing theory, these rapidly frozen compounds should have frozen into amorphous glasses rather than crystalline solids. But all the chemicals that I cooled very rapidly, they ended up being crystalline solids rather than amorphous glasses, which was the opposite of what was predicted by the existing theory. So after 10 days, I was depressed that none of my experiments were coming out. So I went to Professor C.N.R. Rao and Professor K.J. Rao, and I told them that my experimental results were the opposite of the theory. So both of them asked me if I was absolutely sure that I was doing the experiments correctly. And I answered, yes, I'm totally sure that I'm doing the procedures exactly as they were telling me to. So both of them said that they would watch me do the experiments again. And I was, an undergraduate student. I was nervous, but these two world famous scientists, they spent another week in the laboratory carefully watching me repeat all the experiments. And then the results were the same as before, that these chemicals became crystalline solids rather than amorphous glasses, the very opposite of the theory that had been formulated by several world renowned scientists in America and Europe. So Professor C.N.R. Rao said, oh, okay, maybe Ravi's onto something new. Maybe if Ravi's experiments contradict the theory, then maybe the theory itself is wrong. Professor Sina Rao said, let us examine the assumptions made by all those scientists in America and Europe when they formulated this theory. And it is possible that all of them are wrong and that Ravi's experiments are right. And then CNR Rao and KJ Rao, they did research on this topic for the next few years. I had meanwhile graduated and gone on to the US. And 3 years later, they indeed discovered that the theory formulated by the foreign experts was flawed and based on erroneous assumptions, which worked sometimes and didn't work at other times. And so Professor C.N.R. Rao and K.G. Rao, they came up with a new theory to explain my experimental results, and they very generously included me as a co author in their international publications when all I did was actually just grind the glasses and grind the compounds and heat them up and freeze them. And this experience came in useful for me at Carnegie Mellon for my master's thesis, where again my experimental results contradicted the existing theory. And so I had to come up with a new explanation of why my experimental results contradicted the existing theory, and I had to tell the world famous professors at Carnegie Mellon and USA to their face that they were wrong and that I was right. And if I had not had that previous experience with Professors C.N.R. Rao and K.J. Rao at IIT Kanpur and Indian Institute of Science in Bangalore, then I probably would not have had the confidence to do this in USA, where I had to tell the very professors whose textbooks I had grown up on as an undergraduate, I had to tell them to their face that they were wrong and that my experiments were right. So, so please subscribe to my YouTube and IGTV channels, and please follow my Twitter account at RVP, as well as my LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram accounts. My Twitter account is at RVP. This is Ravi Visvesvaraya Sharada Prasad saying goodbye on Tuesday, 21st September 2021. Have a great day.